Have you ever been told that your writing is too dark, too sad, or that it needs more levity? Or have you ever wondered how a story about something truly tragic can grow into something that's more than the sum of its parts? Well, let me tell you about my client, Casey Mulligan Walsh. In 2021, I completed a manuscript evaluation for her where we explored what was truly at the heart of her book and how to ensure the big picture things she wanted to discuss didn't get buried by the challenges she faced. Between then and now, she has worked tirelessly on her manuscript, written pieces for the New York Times, HuffPost, Modern Loss, and many others, and lasered in on how to elevate her truly catastrophic losses into a memoir that speaks about so much more. This week, I am delighted to speak with her as she launches her debut memoir, The Full Catastrophe: All I Ever Wanted, All I Feared. Join us as we discuss Casey's revision process, what it took to embrace both the heartbreaking and beautiful aspects of life, and how she became a small press author whose book debuted at #2 in Amazon's grief and loss category. Way to go, Casey. I am so proud of you. Listeners, grab your pen, open your hearts, and get ready to learn what revision can teach you and where Literary Citizen can get you on this week's episode of the Writing Your Resilience podcast. Let's dive in. Welcome to Writing Your Resilience, a podcast for writers who want to create stories that change lives, especially their own. I'm your host, Lisa Cooper Ellison. As a writer and trauma-informed writing coach, I'm here to guide you on a transformative journey through the art of writing, self-discovery, and resilience. Each week, I'll share my best tricks, tips, and strategies to help you write more authentically, craft deeper, truer stories, and overcome the common storytelling roadblocks we all face. Together, we'll explore how to bounce back when life gets tough and stay connected to your inner calling. So grab your pen, your notebook, and an open heart. It's time to do the work that changes the world, one story at a time. Hi, I'm Lisa Cooper Ellison, and I am excited to invite you to join me on March 5th for my course, Memoir Backstory. If you're a memoirist, you know that backstory is a crucial part of your memoir, but it can be so tricky to figure out how much to include and how to weave it in without overwhelming your story. In this webinar hosted by Jane Friedman, you'll discover what to keep, what to cut, and what to repurpose so that you can write a captivating story while also working on your author platform. Best of all, this webinar is only $25. To register, go to janefriedman.com/memoir backstory with Lisa Cooper Ellison or click on the link in the show notes. I look forward to seeing you on March 5th. Well, hello, Casey. I am just overjoyed to have you on the podcast today because we get to talk about The Full Catastrophe, your memoir that is coming out now, which I am so excited about because I've been a part of your journey.
You absolutely have been a part of my journey, Lisa, a big part of my journey. And I'm just thrilled to be on your show. I just so admire your podcast. I listen to every episode and I honestly learn something every single time. So I'm so grateful for you having me here. Thank you.
Well, we are going to dive deeply into your memoir. But before we do, I want to give you an opportunity to give us the first description of your book. So, what would you like us to know about The Full Catastrophe and also about you as a writer?
Wow. Well, The Full Catastrophe is my story of the search for belonging after repeated loss and navigating uncertainty and learning to live with grief beside joy. I was orphaned at 12 and my only sibling died when I was 20. And that set me off on a search for home that really rose above every other goal I had in life. And I did create that family I dreamed of. But when my marriage began to fall apart, I embraced a new spirituality that became a lifeline during a hostile divorce. But then the unthinkable happened, the death of my 20-year-old son, Eric. And that loss, of course, was devastating. But the spiritual strength that I'd cultivated during the divorce really helped me navigate my grief and find a deeper sense of belonging. through it all, I learned that life rarely goes according to plan, and that even in the most heartbreaking moments, there's room for healing and peace and unexpected joy. And for me, then this goes back to the title, it's about embracing the full catastrophe of life in all its messy and beautiful complexity. And the other thing I'd like to say is one of the things I hope to accomplish with this book was to illustrate how losses, especially losses that happen before we reach adulthood, really
Mhm.
can dictate the decisions we make for the rest of our lives and alter the way that we see the world. And similarly, I think choosing to see the world through a different lens, in my case, it was spirituality, can affect the way that we think and the choices we make and ultimately who we become.
Yeah, this is a book that contains so much loss. For someone who hasn't gone through these things, and I have my own relationship to loss, this could have been such a relentless story of just darkness and doom and gloom. And that's not what this is. And that's one of the things that I have really enjoyed about this book is that you're able to walk that fine line by really taking us into this world, allowing us to see through this narrator's eyes, to experience all of these things, and then realize how, just as you said, all of those early losses created this foundational need and desire that fueled all the rest of her decisions throughout this book.
100% true. And I think many of us who write know that when we begin to write, those threads are not always gelled for us. We don't always, I didn't start out thinking about my life or even early on writing about my life with this whole trajectory and all of these lessons firmly in place, right? That we learn a lot as we're writing, I think. And
Yes.
that was definitely true for me.
Yeah, and so you started writing this in 2011. You and I worked together in 2021, and then you went off and did more work. Let's see, it's going to be 2025. So if I'm doing the math right, we're talking 14 years to write this book. So what did you learn about yourself and about the story through writing and revising it?
Yes. 2011 is when I started writing essays. I was working with Marion Roach Smith, who's local to me, and her group was very pivotal for me. And then a group of us kind of broke off and met every 2 weeks for 7 years. So every 2 weeks for 7 years, I had an essay because I wasn't showing up without something to get feedback on. And in 2017, I kind of had this one pivotal moment where I decided that I was going to just rough out what chapters might look like, and maybe this should be a story. There are many collections of essays that are beautiful, and that's exactly what they should be. And I think at first I thought I can just do this collection of essays, but I think this story really needed to be a story with a narrative arc and
Mhm.
not an essay collection. And so that's when I started working on it as a book in 2017. In 2019, I worked with Allison K. Williams in Tuscany at her first retreat. So that was pivotal for me because right after that is kind of when everything exploded in a lot of our online writing groups and Writer's
Mhm.
Bridge and all of those things. So that was really important. And then in 2020, a group of us started an online writing group, and we're very close and we're still together. And we all had full length manuscripts. So we've been through each other's full books twice. And in the middle of that time is when I worked with you. I felt as if I thought I had the whole story there. I thought I was close, but I just wasn't that sure that the beginning was riveting enough. You
Mhm.
can't tell an agent or publisher that it gets really good in the middle. You've got to grab them from the beginning. And that full read that you did with the amazing, not just comments, but little craft lessons throughout,
Mhm.
really, I think, made the book what it is today. But back to your question, what happened at the same time that you were reading my manuscript as the result of just doing some other webinar is I had this huge aha moment that the book, while it was a story of relentless loss and, multiple losses and resilience, it was really a story about the search for belonging. And that had just never gelled for me after all those years, right? Until that moment. So 10 years into writing, I suddenly realized the thread that ties it all together is the search for belonging or the search for home. It didn't change huge scenes. You might read the book and think it isn't that different, but it did change the context within which
Yes.
everything happened and how I steered each scene. And ultimately, you asked how it changed the book, but it changed me and my
Mhm.
thinking about the life that I lived. I used to say when I was a young married person that that I got a 2-year degree. I didn't go on and do all of the things educationally I should have or wanted to do because I needed a family more than I needed an education. So I knew that early on, but I don't think I quite grasped how deeply it directed every single decision I made. And then that's kind of on a global level. On a more granular level, many of these things you'll recognize because they're things you brought to my attention when you
Mhm.
read the manuscript. I needed more scene, less exposition. And to me, that goes hand in hand with we like to talk about the South Park model with everything being connected by but and therefore. And the funny thing is, when I was a speech language pathologist and I did a lot of work with literacy with kids, that was my big focus. And I used to teach ways to improve writing and comprehension from kindergarten to 12th grade. You can use the same strategies. And one of them is if you can take a couple of words and connect those thoughts with but, because, or so,
Mhm.
then you can not only write well, but you can display a clear understanding of the content. And so for me, it's the but, because, or so is what sticks in my
Mhm.
head. So, Allison K. Williams had a great blog post about this that I looked at recently. But, just that every scene either arises from the previous one or leads to the next. And that was really, really helpful. And in my case, didn't change anything that really happened. But for example, there's a sequence of really pivotal events that happened when I was living with relatives after my parents died.
Mm.
And I just kind of manipulated those to have happened all within like a 2-day sequence. And it doesn't really change anything, but I think it made it much more compelling to read. So those are the kinds of things that were helpful. But also, I think that the time between the events that took place in the book and when I actually even started writing was long enough. I wasn't writing in the middle of the trauma and the pain. And I think that was really helpful. Let's say that was 10 years. I still needed the next 10 years of writing to fully digest things like, especially with my former husband and his
Yeah.
mother, who had been like a mother to me, that I could begin to see that, and this goes along with the kind of my spiritual beliefs too, right? That we're all here trying to get what we need or working through
Mhm.
our fears. And I think that there was a lot about me that brought up a lot of fear for both of them. I also
Mhm.
think that I married someone who wasn't right for me and then tried to make him into someone he couldn't be.
Yeah.
And so, there's enough, I don't even like to use the word blame, but there's enough erroneous thinking, fear to go around, right, in any situation. The one last thing I'd like to say is that it was one of the most difficult things to write was the spiritual evolution because it's very
Mhm.
difficult, I think, to write something like that without sounding like you're proselytizing or preaching or
Yeah.
using spiritual bypass. Like I just, had all these airy philosophical feelings, so I didn't have to feel anything. And so I
Mhm.
worked really hard. And Glennon Doyle's Love Warrior was one book that was very helpful to me in seeing how she wrote about her change in spirituality and in thinking in the middle of the struggle. Like, and
Mhm.
that's what I tried to emulate, which is, there's a passage where like I'm laying in bed and I don't know how any of this is going to work out and it just seems so hopeless, yet I have this peace. And also like there were times early on where I kind of felt like, is it really okay for me to believe this? Or, this is just kind of a little shift. It wasn't an antithesis to what I always believed, but it was a shift. And so I tried to show those things within the struggle, not like, oh, and then one day I just decided to believe this and everything worked well, because that's just not believable. And I did show the pain and the sadness and all of those things, because otherwise you're just bypassing your real feelings. And we
Yes.
don't want that.
No, and I think readers they call BS on it because it's not really how it
Yes,
works. And I
right.
really felt like you walked that line really well between
Thank you.
saying, this is what I rely on. This is what's helping me cope and helping me get through this awful experience. And I still have feelings about this awful experience. I don't always behave in ways that I would have liked to have behaved in these awful experiences. And so I want to just summarize some of the things you just said. And one is that you needed time away from the situation before you could really write honestly about it. And then it took time and a lot of drafts to be able to digest and process and understand that. And it's not just enough to process and understand. If you're trying to write a publishable book, you have to really understand your angle. And I could see how you had really framed things towards the angle of belonging at every single scene. Like when we met back in 2021, you had rendered your scenes really well. You immersed me in the place. I felt like I was there. You rendered your characters. You did all of that work. But it was like a situation is happening. And yet, what are the stakes? What's the motivation of this character? Why
Right.
is this character behaving this way? Why do they tolerate such and such? And that's where that framing comes in really nicely. And it's clear and it gives your book something additional, right? It elevates a story of grief and allows it to be about something else, which
Yes.
contributes to the conversation around grief. That it's not just that we grieve or we hurt or we've lost people, we lose people within a context, and it shapes the context through which we see our entire lives.
Yes, it's so well said. And it's so gratifying to me to know that you got that when you read it. That's just wonderful. I've really struggled with kind of my elevator pitch or describing my book to people, because sometimes I get through the first line and they're just like crying. And then I have to be like, no, wait. So then I've learned to kind of move the more hopeful stuff up to the top. And
Hmm.
then explain, because we all love to talk about Vivian Gornick and the situation and the story, and the situation is pretty grim in a lot of this book,
Yeah.
but the story doesn't have to be.
Exactly. And you bring that light in. And when I think about like, what is the essential question of this book? And to me, the essential question of the book is how do you embrace the full catastrophe of life, the thing you want, when that full catastrophe can be pretty catastrophic? Like, how do you hold
Yes,
space for both? And I
yes,
see you wrestling through that, or I see the narrator wrestling through that. That's probably a better way to talk about it. So, writers, if you're hearing me say that, let me tell
yes,
you why. We want to make sure that we have distance from that character on the page. And even though this is Casey's story and she's talking about her life, the person who lived through those things, that character is not her. It's not the person who's in front of me right now.
right. That's very true. I think that, I'm jumping around a little bit, but I think that good critique partners, trusted critique partners,
Yes.
are so important. You really need to trust your inner voice, but
Hmm.
that comes after. I love that. Have you seen that meme where there's a pizza and it's a whole pizza and it's got like a whole chicken on one half, like the whole bird, and then the other half has chocolate sprinkles and M&Ms, and there's some olives thrown on there, and the caption is, "Thanks for your comments on my draft. I've made all the edits."
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
if you listen to everyone, that's what you're going to have, the pizza with the
Hmm.
chicken and M&Ms. But it's hard, I think, when you're a new writer and you first get critique and you can feel, super misunderstood
Yeah.
or defensive, or, well, maybe they just don't like me. I mean, there's so much that comes up
Hmm.
in the very beginning. And then I think you have to learn to listen with discernment, right?
Yes.
So one thing is you don't need to discuss every comment. It's not like you're defending yourself, right?
Mhm.
But that being open to the fact that maybe the people you're working with know this one thing about craft that I haven't learned yet, right? Or
Right.
maybe they have something, something to teach me. And so a little shift off of that is that there were times, I mean, we all like to say in our writing group, we've all cried at one point or the another, right? And there are those times where they just don't understand what I lived through.
Right.
They don't get this. And there is that old adage that's so important that you critique the writing, not the life. And that's
Mhm.
really important. But there have been times when because I trust these people, that I've pushed through that to either, if you don't get it, I have to write it more clearly. We know
Mhm.
that. But maybe I don't even get it as much as I
Yeah.
thought I did. Maybe there's something in that situation that I'm looking at it from my one perspective. And I don't have to agree with them, and it has to ring true for me,
Yeah.
but maybe I should just sit with it a little bit. And sometimes it's just more a matter of I'd write a line that seemed self explanatory, and someone would say, "That doesn't make any sense to me. What do you mean? Why does it matter?" One example I can think of is at some point I said something about understanding that we operate either out of love or fear, and sometimes people are acting out of fear. And somebody else who doesn't maybe think just like me said, "Well, what does that matter?" And I just said, "Well, it doesn't change what happened, but it changes me." That's the
Yeah.
line that needed to be in the book that wasn't there. And so, I just think it's time away from the event, then it's the time
Mhm.
of writing. But I do think trusted critique partners, I don't think any of our books, we all feel like, would not be what they are if we hadn't had this group.
Yeah, trusted critique partners are so important. And yet, you pointed out something that's really important. And I'd like to unpack it a little further with you if we can.
Hmm.
And that is the idea that when you are working with a critique group, number one, it needs to be a trusted critique group, meaning to me, and feel free to jump in on this, is that you feel like they can offer you the type of feedback you need, like they have the skills and they have the compassion and openness to inhabit and understand your story.
Yes. And that the critique is positive, and I don't mean positive like, oh, yay, yay, right? But that it's productive critique that's designed to be
Yes.
helpful to you, not to be demoralizing.
Mhm.
Even in the best critique groups, you can walk away demoralized. I mean, no group is perfect all the time. Then you have to interrogate yourself. Well, what is it about that
Yes.
makes me feel that way? Is that just the emotional connection I have to the event? Or is it the emotional connection I have to
Mhm.
thinking I wrote it well? And, you really have to sit with that sometimes. I also think that trust with critique partners is built over time too.
Yes.
I think when you have people that have demonstrated ongoing commitment, then all the stakes change, for the
Mhm.
better. Yeah.
Absolutely. Some of the best critique groups I've been in have been around for a long time, and they've
Hmm.
also included people who have frankly pissed me off. And
Yes.
I found that the things that upset me have actually been for my highest good, right? So it's not
Exactly.
bad, but the worst kind of feedback to me is feedback like, well, it doesn't work for me as a reader. Like, okay, and what do I do
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I think the end result of all of that is that because what I can fall prey to is wanting to get too many opinions. And I have
Yes.
another very trusted writing editing friend who will say, like, stop. Just
Mhm.
now it's time to go with your gut. Like, go with what
Yes.
works for you. And so I do think the big global one liner is trust your inner voice, but that's not trust your inner voice before you learn a lot and listen to a lot. I mean, you have to get that skill. And you also have to ask yourself, is the person who's critiquing your work, do you like their writing?
Yeah.
I mean, do you trust this person and do you respect their writing? But then in the end, even if you do, it's still your writing that's coming from your heart and your mind, and you have to make that final choice.
Absolutely. So when you think about, to me, what you're saying is you need to be open, you also need to learn, and you need to be discerning. And so having
Yes.
that, what I call creative intuition, that divining rod inside you, that allows you to say, yes, this feedback is something I really need to attend to, or no, this feedback isn't something that's going to work for my story, or hey, even though everybody's telling me this thing doesn't work, something
Hmm.
inside me is saying it has to be there. How can I
Right.
trust that it's got to be there? It's just that I have to figure out how to make it clear. So, what have you
Yes.
done in your writing life to foster that creative intuition and to be able to trust it?
Interesting. I don't know if I could pinpoint exactly what I've done, but I do know that sometimes you can give your work to an editor specifically to have huge swaths cut. Like, I know this is too long, this
Mhm.
has to go. And some of the time I've tried it, even though I thought the big section, for example, that didn't need to belong there, made a lot of sense to me for it to belong there.
Yeah.
I've always, I think, tried to try it without, because sometimes just something happens. When you see the rest of the work that's juxtaposed now because of that thing
Yes.
that's gone, or someone suggests you move this section up here. I had one time where, I don't know, I moved something to the beginning. I think it was the second chapter, and it was just a whole different scene than it was buried
Right.
in a chapter. So I think sometimes it's just try it. I've had people say, well, maybe the whole spiritual part of this is a little too far afield. Like, maybe just make it about how you learned that you weren't in control of everything.
Mhm.
And that, for me, I thought about it for a second, but for me, that could be a really good book, but that's not the book I was writing.
Mhm.
It wouldn't have been a genuine representation of my story. So I think you try it, but if there's just something internally that tells you if you're on the right track or not, and sometimes it's hard to know, but when you clearly know something doesn't feel right, then don't do it.
Absolutely, because if you do something, even if somebody's like the super smart editor person who knows all the stuff, if it's
Right,
not right for your story and you do it, it's never going to feel like your story. So
right.
you have to trust that inner knowing and know what it feels like. So for me,
Hmm.
my inner knowing feels like sometimes a warmth or a tightness in my chest. I'll feel that as like a yes or a no. Where do you feel it in your body?
Oh, that's interesting. I think if it's a no, it's kind of my stomach has always been my Achilles heel. It's kind of, I can have something like that happen and instantly my stomach hurts.
Mhm.
So there's kind of those things. I feel like if it's the times that people have suggested something or on my own, I've moved something or changed it or whatever, I think there's like almost a lightness.
Yeah.
There's a little kind of feeling of giddiness almost that, oh, this is
Mhm.
sizzling for me right now. Yeah, I think that I would say that. I want to say that one of the things that you had talked about, because, and this goes back to how it takes a while to get perspective, maybe a long, long while. One of the things you had said is, the reader really needs to feel like you got something of what you wanted before you lose it. I mean, that's good story structure
Mhm.
anyway, right? There has to be this false victory, and then. So, because of how difficult everything was with the divorce and then my son's death, and it was, let's face it, like way before the divorce, there was just a
Yeah.
lot of challenges in our marriage. But because it ended so tragically, all of it, it was really a long time before I could connect with the good stuff. I could write you 100 essays about the challenges. Those are the essays that sell, the trauma and all of
Right.
that. In fact, in the beginning, I was writing a lot about Eric toward the end. And way back, I was really struggling. I was thinking, I don't even remember that much of his childhood, which you'll laugh when you
Mhm.
read the book now. But I was struggling to reconnect with all of the times that were really great. So I specifically, and I'm sure you saw this when you read the book, but after that advice, I wrote that Christmas scene, which is like one
Yeah.
of my favorite scenes in the whole book. And that really is how it was, for us on Christmas.
Mhm.
And so, I think it also gives a nod to the fact that there have been difficult times behind us and there's plenty more to come. But for
Yes.
today, everything is perfect. And that's kind of how life is, right? We have those glowing days, but they don't always stay that way. And we all behave maybe for something special like that. But I'm so grateful that that scene is in the book. I don't think would have been the same story without it.
I'm glad that you put it in there as well. It's one of my favorites. And you just said something that's really important because I work with a lot of writers who are working on tough stories. I know a lot of people who want to write about traumatic childhood or some other kind of experience that's really big and heavy and dark. And
Hmm.
they all get the same feedback, which I've gotten myself, which is where's the levity? Where's the lightness? And
Right,
if you are connecting with that pain, your brain is in a neural network, it's in a rut that is related to that pain. So it makes it actually physically difficult to remember the good times. But what you said is so important because so many people are like, yeah, but my experience was dark. My experience was this. And for today, sometimes people behave in ways that are light and wonderful and it all works out. And to allow
right,
that, it can be just for today. Like that can even be your mantra. I don't have to find the special
mhm,
moment that makes this person look so great, but you can say, what is
right,
the just for today moment
right.
that gives us all a breath?
I feel that way about that whole funny series of voicemails from my son Kyle. Like, he would tell you that it's the best part of the book. But, I could have done all kinds of things to try to describe how funny he could be. And, but that series of voicemails that I came home to that night when I forgot to pick him up did so much of a better job illustrating that than any, little made up scene or exposition I could have come up with. Those were the days of tapes and answering machines.
Hmm.
And I had saved that tape, and years ago I transcribed that. So that's like really word for word from
Oh
those
my gosh, I
voicemails.
love it.
Yeah. So it's good when those things present themselves because it's hard to manufacture levity when it's not
Yes.
genuine.
And we don't want to
Mhm.
make things disingenuous, right? We want to be
No.
true to what our experience is, but figure out what is the richer version of the truth. And so
Yes.
you did a lot of work to make that happen in your book, and you went on a long writing and revising journey. And now you're on the other side of that journey, which is the publishing
Yes.
journey. And
Yes.
we're recording this about, gosh, about 6 weeks now. Is that correct?
Yes. Just about 6 weeks. Yes.
So 6 weeks before the release, and you are in that gauntlet in the lead up to your book launch. And this is a book from a small press that is
Hmm.
mighty, right? It's a great press,
Yes.
Matina Press. I love them, and
Yes.
they put out wonderful work. And one of the obstacles many small press authors have is that if you're not the darling of a big five press, there's not the money there, right? So you have to put in the lion's share of the work. And you have some impressive stats, my friend. You
Yes.
have, I think, around 260 people who are on your launch team, which is so great. And already, again, we are 6 weeks out. You have 105 reviews on Goodreads. That is amazing. So, what have you done to build this kind of author platform that is allowing you to do all of these things and spread the word so well in advance of your book?
Well, I have to say, first of all, I have the most amazing launch team. I have people who have just gone over and above to connect me with people, to set up events. Just they've been amazing. I would say a couple things. First of all, it is about literary citizenship and it's
Yes.
about genuine, not transactional support for people, but it's equally about in real life connections, right?
Hmm.
So I have said this before and I haven't done it, but I think one of the things I should do is kind of go through my launch team list and get a feel for the percentage of people who are writing literary community friends and people who are just in real life friends throughout my life. I don't know if it's about a 50-50 mix, but I think in general, it's all about building and nurturing relationships, whether
Yeah.
it's in real life or online and again, genuine, not transactional
Yes.
relationships. I'd say if I just bulleted it out, it would be start early, stay organized, and save everything, and be sincere and express gratitude, genuine gratitude,
Yes.
right? So I would say about 4 years before I signed with Motina, I started really developing connections within the literary community. And again, I think it all started when I worked with Allison K. Williams in Tuscany. And that was when, right after we came back, Writer's Bridge started. Some of your listeners may know about some of the binders groups. And so I got very active
Hmm.
in some of those. But then it's also going out of your way to go to an author's lunch party or a reading or, Hippocamp, which we all love and miss
Hmm.
so much. I went to Writers in Paradise in Florida, like to the extent that you can be in community with other writers. And then I feel like any of those things I've ever done, there's always a handful of people you keep. The
Hmm.
people who you really hit it off with, and those kind of tentacles go far and wide, especially if you're the kind of person who maintains those connections.
Yes.
But I have people on my launch team that I went to high school with. I have people that I'm on the board of the Family Heart Foundation. I have a lot of support from them. People I worked with or went to school with in my speech language pathology career. I can't even tell you, just all, I just basically asked just about everyone I could think of, but that leads to how you ask, right? So,
Yes.
first of all, I'm a big saver, so I've saved lots of launch team letters from other people and took pieces that felt genuine for me. I personalized every one of those 260 letters because there's emails, because there's nothing worse than just getting what's clearly a stock email.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of it had to be stock. This is what it means, this is what I'd ask you to do.
Hmm.
But it only takes a minute to write a genuine little paragraph about how much you enjoyed working at this thing with this person or whatever. And a lot of very clear, if this is not the right time for you, if this isn't going to work for you, absolutely fine, you
Yeah.
know, and because you don't want anybody to feel pressured. First of all, if they feel pressured, they'll say yes and they won't do everything you ask them to do
Hmm.
anyway. And I'm a big, not necessarily that organized at home, but I'm very organized in my writing life. So I have all kinds of spreadsheets. And this is a little ancillary to building the team, but I think it relates in that generosity always comes back to
Yes.
you. And so, like, I have this elaborate small press spreadsheet or where to submit essays. I do not see any reason why I wouldn't share that with
Hmm.
anybody who's interested. Like, why not? You know? And so you develop some goodwill that way. Also, I've had a few of the pieces I've had published have really struck a chord, especially in the grief community. And so when people have written me or just make comments in some of these groups, I've kept a list of people that would be potentially interested
Yeah.
in the book. Because, sometimes you'll hear, oh my God, this piece moved me and I'd love to read your book.
Hmm.
Well, so you just say, I was so moved by your comment and I'm just checking to see if you'd be interested. And then I think that just all goes hand in hand with all the things we know about literary citizenship, about supporting other writers and contributing to the literary
Yeah.
community and, being generous. Also, I'm in that other Flash group and we just started a Substack based literary magazine.
Yes.
And that's like really exciting because we get to pick one person each set of submissions that gets the whole spotlight. And it feels so good to be able to do that for maybe a new writer, maybe an experienced writer. We don't know because we read blind, so we
Hmm.
don't know who we've chosen. And our first issue just came out, and it's called In a Flash. The piece we chose was just beautiful. And so it does feel really good, genuinely good, to support other writers.
Yeah, putting out that energy, starting early, staying organized, and being a good human. That's what I always say. Be a good human, don't be
Yes.
transactional, and don't
Right.
expect a tit for tat, right? You might
Right.
help all of these people, and they may not be the people who helped you,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
someone else will. And you
Right.
cast a wide net. You didn't just think of, oh, these are the writers that I know. Yes, these are the writers I know, and these are the people from the Family Heart Association. These are my
Hmm.
friends from college and the people that I worked with as a speech language pathologist. These are the people that I know in all of these other environments. And it's really important to cast that wide net. And one thing I will also say as a shout out to you is you offer reminders because people need them. And you make your ask clear and easy to execute on. And I think that's also really helpful. So you have done an amazing job. I am so excited to see where this takes you. And you've also offered so generously all of this, writing advice that you have for everyone. So I have two last questions for you. And one question is, we're in 2025. You are in the gauntlet, as I have already said. How are you
Yeah.
caring for and really nourishing your resilience as you prepare for your book launch in a year of change?
Well, I would have had a very different answer for you a few weeks ago, but I had a health scare the week before
Yeah.
Christmas and I was hospitalized and everything is fabulous, but I'm deeply exhausted from this.
Mhm.
And so probably most of my friends would say that it's good that it happened because I'm not good at resting. And so it's kind of enforced and it's been good. And, sometimes that's a difficult question, right? Like, what do we do to
Right.
nurture ourselves? And I think I could talk about, hot baths and all that kind of thing, but this is kind of full circle to what we just talked about. I think that for me, my relationships are what nurtures me and
Mhm.
keeps me focused and sane. And so having this wonderful community of in-person friends, but also writing friends, actually three close writing friends who have just been through this, they've been very, very helpful in just having those connections. I still have to work on biting it off all at once. I still
Yeah.
feel like I have a million things to do. And if you ask me what they are, I have to take a minute. I just have that big cloud of I have a million things to do.
Mhm.
But I think knocking them off one by one and just reminding myself that I just do what I can do today
Yes.
brings me back as much as I'm able to. I will say that when I had this scare in December, one of the biggest things was yes, it's Christmas, but thank God it's not February because
Yeah.
if I had put all of this work into, we have wonderful launch events happening the week of the book launch, and I have several friends coming in from out of town, and it's just going to be so
Mhm.
exciting. And that would be more of a disappointment than missing Christmas
Yeah.
to miss that. So I'm really grateful for those. I think that's the nurturing too. Self nurturing is the relationships that I have with people and the gratitude I have for them.
Mhm. Yeah, relationships, gratitude, and it sounds like your willingness to receive their care and their help as you allow yourself to rest. And
Yeah.
I am so glad you're okay. Gosh, when I read about that, I was like, oh, how
Yeah. Yeah.
scary.
It was scary, but it was perfect. I mean, it's one of those things, without going into detail, it's one of those things that you could look at either way, right? If you,
Mhm.
oh my goodness, this thing happened to me. But in retrospect, and even in the moment, I think I was so grateful. Yes, I missed a fun weekend in New York, but I was at the best hospital and I got the best care and I didn't have 1 second of second guessing because I knew I was in the place that I should be. And then the results of everything, really, I'm in better shape than I was before it happened. So I don't have anything to feel bad about. Back to nurturing, that doesn't mean like a week after it happened, just the other day, all of a sudden I did have that like, holy crap, this
Mhm.
is what just happened to me. So you have to kind of let that flow through you too.
Yeah.
It may not happen in the beginning, but there's comes a day where you're like, whoa, and then that flows through and then you can move on.
Yes,
So,
letting those emotions flow
yeah,
through is so important. Well, if
yes.
people would like to connect with you, they want to see what you're up to, they want to learn about those events that are going to be happening for your book, and most importantly, they want to buy a copy of your book, what are the best ways for people to connect with you?
Well, I think that probably my website, it's CaseyMulliganWalsh.com. That's basically a clearinghouse. I'm on all the social media platforms, including LinkedIn, but all of the links would be there. And in all of those platforms, I'm either Casey Mulligan Walsh or C Mulligan Walsh. So I'm not very hard to find. I have a Substack, Embracing the Full Catastrophe, and you can get to that through my webpage as well. And book orders. The book is available wherever books are sold. There is a page on my website that will have links to all of those things. I have a small hometown bookstore, Cambridge, New York, where the book is set, is the bookshop that if you order from, you'll get a signed copy.
Nice.
And yeah, I guess the short answer to that is pretty much everything anybody would need to know is on my website.
Beautiful. And in case people are wondering, oh my gosh, she said that so fast, everything will be in the show notes. So fear not, it will all be there so that you can connect with Casey. And I just want to end by saying congratulations on publishing the full catastrophe. Oh my gosh, I am so happy for you. And you have put in all the work. I can't wait to see what rewards you reap in this year and the years to come.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's just been delightful to be here with you.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Casey Mulligan Walsh. If you want to learn more about Casey and, most importantly, buy a copy of The Full Catastrophe, please see the show notes for this episode. But before you go, please text the show if you're on Apple Podcast or Spotify, or post a comment on YouTube with a tip or aha from this discussion that's changing the way you see your story, whether it's something on the page or something you're going through. I'd love to hear from you. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I truly couldn't do this podcast without your support. If you love this episode, here are 3 simple ways you can keep this show thriving. 1, subscribe or follow Writing Your Resilience on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube so you never miss an episode. 2, leave a 5-star review to help others discover the podcast. 3, join my engaged writing community by signing up for the Writing Your Resilience newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Write More, Fret Less, a toolkit for gaslight proofing your writing practice. Have feedback for the show, a topic you'd love me to cover, or questions you'd like me to answer? Drop a comment on YouTube, text the show, or email me at writingyourresiliencepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, keep writing, keep growing, and keep showing up for yourself. Your story matters, and I am so proud to be writing alongside you.